titled Kauaʻi Plantation Camp Wildland-Urban Interface Ordinance. I'm going to have Kaʻaina come up, along with Chief Gibson, Doug Green, and Elizabeth Pickett.
Well, as part of the Fire Adapted Communities tenet of the cohesive strategy, a huge piece of it is community awareness, community action, defensible space, policies and funding, but the built environment is a huge portion of the how we get to fire adaptation, resilience, safety. And this was this kind of stumper because we've never worked in that space. And I didn't know how to get anything done in that space in terms of ordinance and codes or anything else, but it became clear after Lahaina that this was what we were going to need to address if we were going to do this work at scale and build safer from the start. So this session is about the Kauaʻi effort to actually get into ordinance wildland-urban interface safety for future developments moving forward in certain areas that have high fire risk. And it has been an honor to be a part of this groundbreaking work to address the part of the system that has long needed it, but it's been challenging to figure out where to start and how to get it done. And with that, I want to hand it off to Chief Gibson to kind of set the stage and tell the story of how we got to a plantation camp ordinance and where County of Kauaʻi is going next with this kind of code work.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I'm in a better spot than Kevin Roach because I get to speak before the three experts. So, yeah, for us, as I kind of talked about in the introduction yesterday, is the state of Hawaii woke up when the wildfires hit Lahaina, and at the same time there were fires burning on Hawaii Island as well. And I had shared yesterday that shortly after that, Mayor Kauaʻi pulled together all the County of Kauaʻi department heads and challenged us with a mission to look forward. How can we protect our communities, knowing that the answer isn't the fire response? And I'll say it now because it is part of what I'd like to say always, and I took this from a speech that Chief Ventura gave. There are no amount of firefighters, no amount of fire engines, no amount of training that could put out a fire like the one in Lahaina, like the one in Malibu or the Eden fire. They proved that in Southern California. They have, within 6 hours, thousands of firefighters on the scene, hundreds of fire engines. They proved it. No amount of firefighters can put out those fires. So, back to our island, 11 months after Lahaina, we were faced with our own wildfire here. That was on the razor's edge of devastation. It was the Hanapepe Heights is where it started, and it spread toward Kamakani Village. The fire was in July, hot day, windy. The fire broke out about 1 p.m., so the winds were increasing that day. They were, at the time, 15 to 20 miles sustained with some higher wind gusts. Our crews initially protected Hanapepe Heights, kind of reduced the threat to those homes, but the fire was moving toward Kamakani. Within minutes, if not the first minute, we were contacted through dispatch, which is always helpful to us. The large landowners nearby, which I believe was Ian Robinson, had already dispatched their personnel with water tenders, lots of crew, and heavy equipment to help manage fire lines and help extinguish the fire. We had assistance from the state, ARF, airport. We ultimately had assistance from PMRF. We also had assistance from Public Works and DOFA DLNR. So as the fire progressed, I was part of staff in KEMA, our Emergency Management Center, and with the information we had coming in, reports from the radio, drone footage from KPD, as well as reports from our pilots, the fire was moving toward Kaʻaina. And we pull up the satellite map image, and with the trajectory and just learning from other fires that we have seen nationally, I know this doesn't sound right, but I would have been happy if we would have only lost 10 or 20 homes to save the 50 that were next closest. And if we had to lose 50, we could save 200. And as the fire progressed, we eventually had 70 helicopters in the air here on Kauai. And for us, that's a lot. Kauai Fire Department, I'm not sure how to do this out here.
You have so much time.
Our fire department owns one helicopter. It's a single engine helicopter, which means it has a limited weight carrying capacity. We can carry about 600 pounds. And if you translate that to water, it's about 70 or 80 gallons of water is how much we could drop on a fire at any one time. For many years, we've been requesting a twin-engine helicopter from our administration. Wildfire response was only part of the necessity for that. The other necessity was we do a lot of rescues, call out. We launch out of WUI Airport, so we spend a lot of gas, air gas traveling to the area. If we take out a patient, which we can only take one or two at a time depending on the weight, we have to leave our rescuers there and go back for them. We have to refuel sometimes. Sometimes darkness comes, we cannot go back. Our rescuers have to stay the night. I'm getting off the subject of wildfire, but I'll bring it back. We needed a twin-engine helicopter so we could stay in the air longer, so we could protect, bring more people back from the trail, bring our own people back, and have equipment ready for the next response. We're getting a twin-engine helicopter. It'll be here in a couple of years. But that day, we had 70 gallons at a time. We had a second single-engine helicopter with another 70 gallons at a time. We had private contractors. Jack Harder put a helicopter in the air. PMRF put 2 helicopters in the air, which can carry a lot more water. And in that same week, there was another incident on the island. So Hawaii National Guard had already pre-authorized their helicopters to support us as well, is how we got to static. But in addition to the fight from the air, we had all the KFD manpower on the ground. We had recalls coming in. Knowing our one way in, one way out across the island, traffic was backed up. The pilots that needed to get to PMRF were 20 miles away in Koloa, but traffic was at a standstill, so we had to get police escorts just to get the pilots to the PMRF so that they could get in the helicopters. While the fight was going on the ground and approaching Kaʻaina, the fire line was there, led by KFD Incident Command, supported by PMRF, ARF, DOFA, Public Works, large landowners, and shoulder to shoulder, they stood their territory, they stopped the fire. We lost one shed on the side of one of those homes. And this was largely in part due to the heart and the commitment around the ground. Also, it was a blessing that the wind didn't pick up and get any stronger that day, or we would have lost that entire community. So I'll take that back to the Mayor's Challenge back in 2023. Kaʻaina Hall led his planning department. That year, they started researching, attending conferences, and they had already had a year's, almost 11 months of work in toward WUI code that can help protect our homes. So when I go back to the statement that the firefighters, no amount of firefighters, fire engines training can put out the fire, we realize that the correct codes, home hardening, defensible space, being ready for it to prevent it from happening is the answer to the response, so to speak. So I'm going to close now and come back with you.
Okay. We designed this panel to be just kind of a conversation, and we put us in a certain order. Because if it's true that no amount of firefighting resources can deal with a wind-driven urban conflagration if we end up in that situation, clearly we have to do all we can to prevent and organize so we don't even get into that situation and we land back on land use planning. And you heard from Doug Green last night, but we Kaʻaina engaged a whole bunch of us all across the board very early on so we could figure out how to do this together. And Doug Green and his colleague, Dr. Kimiko Barrett, came into our effort. We also tapped into other expertise in the room to pull all of this together, but I think this warrants a sort of a deep dive or another conversation about the land use planning aspect and why that's so important and how you engaged with us in this process.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, and I'm going to repeat a little bit what I said yesterday because I think it's important, but we're going to kind of dive down and make it more specific to the Kauai EP. So I met Kaʻaina about a year ago at a WUI conference, the National WUI Conference that was in Kansas City. I met him before that, but he pulled me aside and said, dude, there's only you can say, I'm going to write a WUI code for the plantation in Kauai, and I'm going to sit down tonight for 6 hours and bust this thing out. You in? Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, I've worked with a lot of communities around the country for a lot of years, and it is a slow roll usually. I mean, it is years and years to get anything done, and then sometimes you go back a step, half a step forward. And the excitement and the ability, and I think what it proved to us was that for so many years this has been a fire department problem. You know, and over the last decade, 15 years, we're understanding that it's not a fire department problem. It is not only with Firewise, it's everybody's problem. When it comes to governments and staff, it is every department's problem. And every department has a role in this. And when I see a planning department, again, planners are true to my heart, if I see a planning department taking control of this, I understand the importance of that. We were all in to support what they were doing here. And I think we need to remember that when planning department, risk is baked into land use decisions. When a land use decision is made, when a development is started, that risk is baked in for decades. Like I said yesterday, what we put on the ground is going to be there. And so land use planners, staff at the county level, at the state level, leadership has the ability to change that risk before that development has happened, before it's baked into there. Because it is hard to change, it's expensive to change, it is culturally difficult to change once that development, once that building is built there. And so that's why we try to do it early. And again, land use planning has that ability with support from a lot of other places and from above to decide where we build, how we're going to build, how we're going to lay that out, what we're going to build with, how we're going to connect those structures within there, and what we're going to allow to accumulate in those. And that all is that risk we talked about, right? And that risk, what we allow early on, the fire that ends up happening out of that ignition is dependent about what we allow early on. And I said this again last night, but a fire is an ignition, and it can go one or two ways. It can be a manageable incident, if we design things right, or if we get lucky, and we don't have winds, or there's a lot of luck involved, I'm not going to lie, but it can be a manageable incident, or it can be a community disaster, depending on how that risk was designed early on. And sometimes those are years, decades before that fire even starts. And then the fire department has to respond to that. They're the one who have to deal with what risk was laid down on the ground years before, right? And so planning departments and city, county staff, state leadership all have a role in developing, and again, I'm going to say this again like I did last night a number of times, every decision needs to be looked at, is this increasing risk or decreasing risk to our community? Again, every decision needs to be, are we increasing our wildfire risk by building it this way, or with this material, or in this location, or with this width of street, or are we decreasing that risk? Is this an interruption point or an ignition point? All right, and I think the uncomfortable truth is that we can no longer assume that wildfire and what happens after wildfire is somebody else's problem after we make these land use decisions. We can no longer look at wildfire risk maps as a vegetation-only risk and not take structures into account. We can no longer approve conditional uses, variances, temporary uses without taking into account the wildfire risk. Everything needs to be part of that wildfire risk. We can no longer assume that because it's green, it's safe, and the only risk is brown grass, right? That we can't make our decisions assuming that fire response and emergency response is going to be there to cover our asses after that. That our decision is what we do, they can handle this because they can do their best and they can do everything they can, but in this day and age, with climate change, with everything that's going on, they can't. And we need to make sure that it's safe for our community and it's safe for the firefighters that are going into there to do that. And that's where this transition from fire to what Kaʻaina has done here and what Maui County is looking at doing and what Hawaii is doing with the support of HWMO probably, and the reason I work here as much as I do is because it's probably the most exciting place in the country to work in terms of what's happening here. Hawaii started behind in a lot of places, but it has caught up and moved ahead of the majority of the country. And it's through grassroots efforts, it's through passion, it's through the people who are here and how much they love being here and love their community and love the land, probably more than any place I've worked at in the country. So it's an exciting place to be. And I think accidentally increasing risks in our land use decisions or any of our land development decisions, any accidental increase in risk is no longer acceptable. We know the science, we know how things work, we know how fires burn. There is no excuse for accidental increased risk in anything we do when it comes to how we manage our lands, how we grow our lands, how we develop our lands into the future. So with that,
Now Kaʻaina can tell our story.
yeah. Now,
What happened and where are we going?
Okay. I actually called Elizabeth this morning and I told her, I don't want to talk about the plantation camps. So,
I don't even know what slide is next. We had it all smooth, and then Kaʻaina said, "You're gonna kill me."
after the panel yesterday with Doug and Justice and others, I was kind of like, what was brought up in that panel, affordability, insurability, the role and controversy on setbacks. That's the space we're in now. I'd rather go over with this group who are getting into it on wildfire, the problems in front of us that are waiting for solutions. Having said that, Elizabeth reminded me there are some in the audience who don't know the story of the plantation camps. We'll spend about a couple minutes kind of going over the plantation camps. We'll probably show the video that kind of encapsulate the best, I think. And then I'd like to get into where Kauai is right now with wildfire resiliency, some of the successes we think we're about to have, as well as some of the problems we're still trying to figure out. So, of course, after Lahaina, to get to the plantation camps, after Lahaina, we really started scratching our heads in the mining industry here at Kauai of how, is there a role for us in that space? Particularly after Kamakani, that Fire Chief spoke about, and the mayor challenging us all to find out what our roles are and dig in. And, you know, for planners, it was an eyebrow raise, because firefighters, right, quasi-military organization with fire trucks, aircrafts, unlimited supply of resources compared to planners. And so when looking at this raging inferno of wildfire and the wall of fire, we are Poindexters with notepads. What the fuck are we supposed to do against the wall of fire? I'm going to be crass, but unless you are a firefighter or in DOFA and forestry management, some version of that question is probably rattling around in your head. What are you supposed to do to combat a wall of fire? And that's what the planning department did for 8 to 9 months as we got in that space. And we're diving in with Elizabeth and all the resources she availed to us. We eventually did this with Doug and Kimmy, Barrett, and various emergency management folks, getting in that space. And I'll be clear, we kind of messed up because in our heads we were asking ourselves that question, what do we do against a wall of fire? And I never really verbalized it to Elizabeth, or Hawaiʻi Wildfire, or to the fire chief, or to Doug even. And so we spent 8 months drafting codes around vegetation and how our enforcement team from the civil fine aspect can tackle fuel maintenance. And for 8 months, that policy approach fell apart everywhere we went to try and apply it. And it was falling apart in Kona to no end. It was pretty much had run out of steam. And
At the last summit.
At the last Hawaiʻi Wildfire Summit. And Elizabeth said, come to Kansas City. I think there's something there for you. You're gonna find something, come to Kansas City. So I told our team, which had pretty much had it up to here with trying to figure out wildfire and planning. I said, let's go to Kansas City. Elizabeth thinks there's something there, let's go. And it just clicked in Kansas City. Not that Kansas City was it. It's just that it was the umpteenth time people like Elizabeth and Doug had told us it's not about the wall of fire. It's about the embers. The wall of fire will move through a community. And oftentimes that community is still standing after the wall of fire is gone. It only starts burning 12, 13, 14 hours later. Or in some scenarios, that wall of fire never reaches the community. But the community starts burning. It's not the wall of fire that's starting these fires. It's a blizzard of embers coming at them. Sometimes being tracked as far away as 3, 5, and now 15 miles away from the wildfire and the town starts burning. And so understanding it's the embers, and there are very specific mitigation measures to address the embers. Things like asphalt shingle roofs, which are cheaper than wooden shingle roofs, or meshing up the vents around your house so that the embers can't get in there. Or you can still use wood wall construction because the embers are going to hit it and they're going to drop. They're not going to have prolonged exposure and light that wall on fire. You can have a wooden wall, but it's going to drop and it could have prolonged exposure at that 90-degree intersection. So it's just a piece of metal flashing. Things like that and strategies that are nominal in cost, yet not a part of any code, is what we became aware of and what we crafted into the plantation camp ordinance. Because the campsite almost burned, we felt it was a priority. And I don't want to sugarcoat over it because I'd like to get where we are now, but just to kind of encapsulate the plantation camp ordinance, I don't know if we could play the video.
This bill is important to our Kauaʻi community because it puts people first.
In the heart of Kauaʻi lie our historic plantation camps, cherished communities now facing ever-growing wildfire risks. That's why Kauaʻi County Mayor Derek Kawakami and the Planning Department enacted Bill 2961, strengthening protections for these areas through Wildland-Urban interface regulations.
Hawaii's historic plantation camps represent a distinctive and resilient form of community living. These built environments offer affordable housing with compact lots, homes oriented to the public realm, and shared roadways where kupuna and keiki take precedence over the automobile. They provide a welcome alternative to the sprawling subdivisions and strip mall development patterns that have dominated for decades.
So for a lot of years, we have known that codes and standards were a very important tool for addressing wildfire preparedness and risk that we're facing. And when Kauaʻi Planning Department came to Hawaiʻi Wildfire and said, we're really trying to figure out our role in this, we jumped on board right away because we wanted to see this kind of protection built into the system.
Kauaʻi has 5 historic plantation camps that have existed since back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. We spent the past year and a half with wildfire experts, our fire department, our emergency management agency, WUI Wildfire Management Organization, to come up and craft a reasonable approach, but one that can mitigate future wildfire impacts on the plantation camps themselves.
New or substantially remodeled buildings must be fire hardened, featuring Class A fire-rated roofs, ember-resistant vents, metal gutters, non-combustible cladding, and screened underfloor areas. The code also mandates a 5-foot non-combustible perimeter around homes, along with regular vegetation maintenance within the 30 to 100-foot defensible space zones. Uniquely, it requires residents to participate in an annual wildfire preparedness workshop, paired with a community-wide defensible space cleanup event.
What Kauaʻi County did here was one of the more robust, comprehensive code adoption processes I've ever seen in any country or any community in any city anywhere.
These wildfire regulations, from a cost-benefit analysis, looking at some of the costs out from a home hardening standpoint, are extremely nominal when compared to the overall construction cost of the home.
The main point really was that when we compared the cost of materials for hardening the building, making it more ignition or ember resistant, we found that there was just about $2,700 per home add. So if you do the math, that ends up with like a 0.7% increase in material costs compared to standard.
We have seen firsthand as a community and Hanatete Kamakani fires, and in the state, the Lahaina fires in Maui. And what caused everything advanced of the flames to burn has been the embers being carried by the wind. In a high wind fire event or a wind-driven fire where a residential area is impacted, there are no amount of fire engines, firefighters, or firefighter training that can ever prevent that town from burning. The only way to stop it is to adjust the built environment to be able to withstand the shower of embers.
If they are more fire resistant at that built environment, the danger to the public as well as our responders is reduced, and the likelihood of major incidents.
We've learned from these instances in Lahaina, the Camp Fire in California, the Marshall Fire in Colorado, that this works. This does save property. It will save lives.
Now is the time to start planning better for wildfires, knowing that they're going to come in the future and that communities can be better prepared before the next wildfire becomes a disaster.
And it gives us a model to start thinking through how do we address risk and reduce hazards and build safe from the start in other areas that also have high risks.
The planning department has collaborated with these communities through the use of form-based codes, enabling the reconstruction of camp homes and supporting their thoughtful expansion into adjacent areas. In doing so, we look to our past to help guide a more sustainable and equitable future. At the same time, we must remain mindful of the growing threats posed by a changing climate, rising seas, increased flooding, and more recently, the heightened risk of wildfire.
So with that's what it was a monumental step, I believe, in planning and wildfire resiliency. But having said that, I'd like to move on and kind of go over where we are at right now in Kauaʻi. Plantation camps were identified as one of the most vulnerable communities concerning wildfire on Kauaʻi. But going through the process, identifying, well, what other parts of the island are vulnerable, and really getting into it. I'd ask Doug, actually, can we get maps? Can you do the mapping? And from the wildfire science, right, these embers are blowing 15 miles away and starting fires. There is no place that's not vulnerable to wildfire. So that's segueing us into, well, it's not identifying the next area. It's saying, how do we make the entire island resilient? So we have worked with Elizabeth and team, fire chief and team, Doug and team, and we've come up with an island-wide wildfire draft ordinance that has this public hearing this Tuesday. The home hardening aspect of that code is virtually identical to the plantation camp home hardening requirements. And then those requirements, I know in the news they talk a lot about the miracle home in Lahaina. And I don't mean to poop on that house in the sense that, but that house, after you get to know wildfire science, is not miraculous. That house was built inadvertently in a manner that wildfire standards say it should be built. It had an ignition-resistant roof. It had a clear 5-foot area. Those are embedded within our standards. And what's important, I don't know if you saw Max Del Trails with Unlimited Construction Company, they did those bid outs. The cost of construction materials was less than 0.7%. With labor, it came out to about 1.2%. The materials, about $2,700. With labor, came just under $4,000. So $4,000 on a $500,000 house is nominal in nature. So, when we approach this island-wide philosophy, understanding that home hardening was important, We threaded that in there. One thing that's come out, and this is an issue that still remains to be resolved, is, right, as we well know here in Hawaii, we have multi-hazards. Wildfire has become at the forefront, particularly after Lahaina, but we have hurricane, we have lava, we have flooding. One of the issues that's come up is one of the mitigation strategies for home hardening is putting fire mesh on elevated post-repair structures. Because those embers can get into the house, and whether or not there's debris or things stored in the house, that poses vulnerability that can start a flame and ignite the house. So putting this mesh screening, this 1/8 mesh screening around the house is mandatory. But when we ran that mesh screening by our floodplain manager, he pointed out that violates the flood ordinance. Because when you have a flood, the water's going to hit that mesh screening and move through it. But if there's debris, it's going to get trapped and it's going to push the water higher up, damage, if not outright displace the entire home. So you put that in your code, you're going to violate our flood ordinance for those homes subject to floodplain management. And so we've been working through that now with an international national team, and we've constructed a prototype on Kauaʻi of an elevated structure with the mesh screening. And our first attempt at it, what essentially had to be is we got the mesh screening in and we created a vent that would facilitate the movement of water in and out. And it worked wonderfully until we blew high winds at it. Just saying the water could open that vent, the high winds open it up. And in a wildfire scenario, a high wind scenario, the winds and the embers are going to open it up. And so we went back to the drawing board, and I don't know how to describe it, but we essentially got our hands on relatively cheap, but what can only be described as next-gen vent technology, where it's a metal vent that interspaces with the wire mesh, and we took a baseball bat to it to get it to move, and it wouldn't move. We blew high winds at it, it wouldn't move. But the second water hits it, it activates a lever that opens up the vent, and the water moves through. We're still working through it because the lever mechanism has like a 3/4 inch opening that is vulnerable to embers. I sent it over to Doug and FSR with Derek Alconis, and I was like, I don't know if Derek's still happening. And Derek was like, yeah, man, that's still a vulnerability. I was like, but we're close. I think we're meeting with the vendor to be able to discuss whether or not that mechanism can be slightly adjusted to mitigate the embers. But in close case, you got to be thinking about multidisciplinary approach. Floods and wildfire are two different hazards, but hazards that our built environment is facing here in Hawaii. And we're still trying to get through that. And hopefully it will be resolved in the next couple of months, because hopefully we have an adopted Wildland Ordinance here. The other area that I kind of wanted to touch on is if you have a home hardening requirement, that's the first point. And 90% of wildfire catastrophic situations start from embers. The thing is that once those embers light a few homes on fire, the homes themselves are the fuel source. And the homes themselves are what are contributing, or essentially the urban configuration. Once a few of those homes light, then it's just going to, through flame spread, through heat, through other ember blizzards, it's going to light the rest of the community on a fire in a high wind situation. The ember and home hardening aspect is monumentally important. It's what our home hardening requirements propose and are attempting to mitigate. But this question of can we mitigate urban configuration? And that discussion was talked about yesterday at the time. It was brought up in concerning affordability of homes and setbacks and density. And the fact of the matter is we have to be cognizant on the affordability of homes. That's not just a political issue. I hear it at these conferences all the time. From a wildfire standpoint, the fire science standpoint, it's worth the cost. It's worth the cost, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 a structure. It's worth the cost. From an insurance standpoint, from a safety standpoint, it's worth the cost. But when you're talking about affordability, and yes, affordable is an issue, especially here in Hawaii, there's a housing crisis in much of America. But to kind of paint that picture, especially for some of our mainland friends, because I don't know if everyone from Hawaii is at this stat, right? The majority of Native Hawaiian, the indigenous peoples of these islands, the majority of them no longer live on these islands, right? And if you think about that, the majority of the indigenous people of these islands have put 2,000 miles of water between their home and where they call sacred because of one reason, they can't afford to live here. So when this whole notion of safety versus affordability kind of butt up against each other, I'm sorry, adding $100 a square foot to a house because it's worth it, it's not going to cut it. And it's not politics at work here. It's the policymakers, it's the elected officials really trying to navigate that space. And so, you know, how you deal with urban configuration, and I'm not saying we're not going to do it, but this notion of we can use building material to make sure we don't have to set our structures back 30 feet from each other. You know, when Lance Delceres from Living Construction did the bid out for the cost of construction for our WUI Ordinance, I asked him, oh, can you also do a cost analysis for fire-rated walls and single-family construction? And right now, he's bidding it out at about $450 a square foot. $450 a square foot, so a 1,000 square foot house, $450,000. With the added WUI standards for home hardening, an extra $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, so $454,000. When he bid out hardy board, primarily because of the cost of labor, it came in at an extra $104 a square foot. That, well, if a homeowner is willing to do that, 100% go for it. But as a government agency, we were unwilling to impose that cost on the homeowner. And so we didn't go down the path of building materials. And now, you know, we're looking back at, well, can this issue of setbacks be addressed? And I'll be honest, when the team drafted this Wildland-Urban Interface Ordinance in Reno, of all places where we were at the last conference. The housing industry and the housing advocates tore me to pieces. They said home hardening, they're good. 0 to 5 foot, zone 0, they're good. Zone 1, defensive space, they're good. But 15 foot to property line setbacks, you're out of your mind, you're not going there. And any attempt to do so, we will oppose that ordinance. And I had, the last conversation I had was with Representative Gibson, who's an amazing, wonderful, one of our best allies that we work with, but a housing advocate. He's the housing committee chair at the state legislature. And when I explained what we're looking at doing with the setbacks, he was gung-ho about everything. I said setbacks, he was kind of, everything I know about setbacks and how they need to be reduced and minimized, you taught me. What are you talking about? You're trying to expand the setbacks. And he's right. I have been involved policy-wise the past decade in reducing the setback requirements in our zoning ordinance and increasing density in our zoning districts, sometimes directly in conjunction with the efforts of Gibson. And so we've worked together in that space. And there was this discussion yesterday about setbacks and density. And, you know, I was in Oahu a couple weeks ago, driving through Kauaʻi, and I'm not trying to poop on Kauaʻi, but when I was driving through Kauaʻi, I recognized that Kauaʻi is essentially the single-family section. There's multi-family section, there's a single-family section areas, and Kauaʻi is essentially single-family construction with 8 to 5 foot setbacks, built out to its full maximum density. And with what we've done here in Kauaʻi, it increased the density of our residential lots and reduced the setbacks to no less than 10 feet. That is what the final result will be. And I'll be honest, I don't think that's what we as policymakers envision. And for the planners in the room, I don't think that's what Jane Jacobs and the new urbanists envision when they talk about infill development. And I think, to a certain degree, setbacks and density, from a planner's perspective, have been intimately linked to each other as if they're one and the same. And I think we need to start embracing the idea that we can increase density, because density does need to be increased from an affordable housing standpoint, or from a built environment standpoint, or from an infrastructure standpoint. Density does need to be increased, it does. But this is not, I don't think we shouldn't be tying density and setbacks as one and the same. You can increase density, yet still maintain large setbacks. I just had a discussion with Jeff Darrow, Michelle folks from Big Island. they're like setbacks, not a problem. Setbacks, you have 10 and 20-foot setbacks. And they've got numerous amounts of density in the residential zones. And so I've actually asked Opticos Design, some of you guys might be familiar with the kind of premier form-based code building type consulting firm over in Berkeley. I've asked them to take a scenario of 3,000 square foot lots, 6,000 square foot lots, and 10,000 square foot lots, and design homes with ARUs and guest houses in each of those scenarios, whereby the setbacks are 15 feet from the property line, therefore 30 feet to building, but also allowing shared wall construction, which you can do with zero lot if you're putting a duplex scenario, which is fine from a wildfire mitigation standpoint. And you know, the jury's out. I'm not saying that this idea, this theory that setbacks can be uncoupled from density is going to work, but it's a hypothesis I have, at least. I was talking this morning with someone like, you're out of your mind. So we'll see, but I think in looking at, you know, a systems approach of how we can pull as many levers as possible to still provide housing units that are necessary here while making them more resilient in the face of both wildfire and floods is incumbent upon all of us. So that's kind of where we are with WUI. The public hearing is on Tuesday. We hope to have it up at council by mid-July. I want to save some time for questions or anything that any of the panelists want to do. Hope I didn't ramble too well.
I guess I'd just add, going along with the density decoupling from setbacks, I agree with it, and I think we need to think, and we've talked about this, more broadly about how that density is accomplished. And I think that can be, we don't need a bunch of little single-family homes necessarily to meet that density. We can do attached homes within a thing, still giving us our big setbacks, because we know flame lines. We heard this yesterday, flame lines can be 30 feet. And I don't care if you have hardy-sided home, if you have a 30-foot torch ripping against that home, it is going to ignite that home. You know, it's just, they're not designed for that. Even a residential code standard is not designed for that type of heat over that duration. So there are ways to think, there's duplexes and multifamily units that have all the fire protection systems already in place in those, provide affordable housing, provide density, and provide safety for those people living there. And so I think we're just starting the conversation of what this can look like, and it's going to be a lot of the above, right? To make these communities designed so, hey, maybe this part of the community isn't hardened as much, but this part is, and it acts as that buffer for a fire moving in. You know, so you can protect some of those low-income housing that may not be as expensive with housing that is more expensive. So there's a lot of ways to do this. Yeah, I think we need to kind of think outside what we've always thought about when we look at affordable housing and high density. And look, somebody said it yesterday, look around the country, around the world, for other places that are doing it, because other countries do it all the time.
And just like to bounce off that, I was just saying, it's a problem we're running up, but we're find a solution. Not find a solution, we have to. At the same time, I don't want to put you on the ember aspect. At the end of the day, approaching, we're trying to address now urban configuration, but the plantation camp story is one of tackling the embers. And if you read the Attorney General's report, and Derek Alcomas is somewhere here, it's about a systems approach. It's about starting. And if you read that report, it is absolutely wonderful in the guidance it gives to various agencies and individuals. But it's massive. It's like eating an elephant. And if you're a planner, my recommendation is, how do you start eating an elephant? You start with the embers.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. No, for the other fire service leaders in this room, past and present, in my history, it always been a struggle for a fire chief to convince the planners how important fire safety is. And it is so enlightening, and I'm in such a fortunate spot to have planning leading the forefront for us on this. And it doesn't stop at our planning department. Our mayor understands all this. Our council understands all this. I believe statewide. I cannot speak for the other islands. But it's just a fire chief's dream right now for me in this position here to have the leadership and the foresight that I have here next to me.
Okay, so with the last 2 minutes that we have for the session, I just want to point out that this is our storytelling and our sharing to show you what it looks like to have collective leadership and innovation and thinking outside the box and figuring things out that haven't been figured out before. We have a fire chief that is supporting somebody other than fire to work on fire. We have Doug talking about, well, what if we mismatch where the windows line up? What if we turn the house at an angle and make it not all lined up so it's not just like dominoes? What happens if we mitigate the outside of the subdivision in a way that then we have time to work on the existing housing stock? What are these other kinds of ways we can think about things? And then Kaʻaina has gone through the fastest learning curve and journey on fire, not having that background, and he's taken his whole department on that learning journey. And no one was fire experts, and I think all of you can speak fire mitigation and Zone 0 and 1 and 2 and all those things better than the rest of us who've been teaching it, because you've embraced it and learned it so fully. And then the whole time we were in communication with each other, adding what we could, brainstorming ideas, pulling in all the other experts who work on this kind of stuff, generating some new ideas, and also setting a path where now the rest of the state can follow. And we couldn't see where we were going exactly, but we just kept figuring it out, like Harriet was even talking about, for how communities do work. And so this is the kind of approach that we need, with good communication and outside the box thinking, and just like, we will have to figure this out, and here we are, and we're doing our best to do that. So I want to thank our presenters, but not just for presenting, but just for showing us what it looks like to have courage and leadership and innovation and just determination. And we're doing things that actually folks who've been working on this for a long time, like Doug said, are marveling at. I didn't know we were going fast and doing this like amazingly until people from outside told us, like, this is becoming a model. So, and that's because of this leadership here and all of their teams that support that work. So thank you for leading the way and helping us figure this out and address this issue. And just, it's been so amazing to work together. So thank you for your presentation, but also just for what you're doing with all of this in the world.